Now we come to our Muppet. Well, actually, Muppets of the Month. There's been a last-minute addition to our Muppet of the Month segment, and we're going to start with one which is relatively light-hearted. Um, and some people actually would argue that the Muppetry in this instance is in fact inverted, and I may well try to make that case in a moment. But this is the headline from Wales Online: Armed police stop man dressed as night at Hendra Lake Park in Cardiff. Um, the guy dressed essentially, I think, as something like a Jon Snow tribute. Really, was walking through the park, and an equivalent of an armed response unit, shall we say? Not quite SWAT, I don't suppose, but an armed response unit was sent out with automatic weaponry, just in case this guy was about to go on just in case he was going to get medieval on people, as it were. Um, Lots of people are dressing in interesting and strange ways during this lockdown. We've seen, actually, last month we reported on people who were dressing in period costume to entertain their neighbours during their
Yep.
state mandated allotted exercise time. Um,
Yes.
and also as well, we've seen people dressed as plague doctors as well. Actually, there was a chap in the news who was scaring children, and the police had a word with him about his behaviour. If I remember, I'll put a link to that below. That's not from last month, but we could link to it.
Yeah.
But in this instance, I don't know. What do you think? Because I'm tempted to argue that actually the Muppet is the response. It's if you see what I mean. In so much as really armed response unit. Was
Right.
it that serious? And the reason why I say that, sorry, let me just clarify, is that I know lots of
Yeah.
people who are reenactors, and also actually the
Yeah.
argument was made on the Archaeosuit Facebook page that actually people have a right to dress in alternative costume. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be violent in that instance. But maybe the argument can be made that the Muppet is the guy who goes out with something that looks like a sword. What do you think?
Right. Okay. On the face of it, yes, it does seem a rather over the top reaction. But on the other, again, I do urge our viewer to go and look at the coverage on Wales Online. 'Cause there's some terrific pictures there.
Yeah, and when also it's
You got
clear it's
three.
clear that they had a laugh as well when they realised what had happened.
Well,
Yeah.
the lead image is there's the three RoboCops with their full bat belts and rubber bullet guns and sidearms and carbines with mags attached.
Hmm.
And this little guy with the hood and sort of and what looks like a plastic or wooden sword. And they're obviously having a laugh and a joke about it. So thankfully, he's not been sort of pinned to the floor at gunpoint, hands behind the back, and the cable ties going on.
Hmm.
They clearly dealt with it proportionately and sensibly, and all credit to them for doing that. Um, I'm torn about this one because I love the idea of last time there was the couple I think who dress in Regency
Hmm.
costume, so it's almost like sort of Lizzie Bennett and Mr. Darcy going out for a walk.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's lovely and funny and sweet and entertaining, as you say.
Although it'd be
Uh,
quite funny to see them
as
in a face get on the ground now kind of
Yes,
scenario.
absolutely,
Mr. Bennett,
absolutely.
are we going to be
Um,
shot in our beds? So go on.
no, I watched Pride and Prejudice and Zombies the other night, and a lot of fun it is too.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but no, the other part of me, and again, Cards on the Table, I have organised living history events which have
Mm.
included uh, people carrying weapons and displays of weapons and so on. And we've always notified the local police that this is going on and what's going to be there and so on, just in case somebody, a passerby who doesn't understand what's going on, rings up and we get exactly that response.
Yes.
So that the police control room knows that there are people dressed in military uniforms carrying rifles doing a display at this particular school and they might be seen in the playground. That was one in particular where
Yeah.
thought it was necessary to make make clear, notify the event,
Mm.
so that this kind of thing didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I
Um,
suppose in that sense,
so
but it's interesting how I think lots of people who attend those events are
yeah,
unaware of the protections that have been put in place for them. So, for example, if
yes,
people turn up and again, it's weird because so people I know who might dress up in Second World War gear with deactivated weaponry, so on and so forth, turning up on a site will be aware of how to handle that and so on and so forth. But they
absolutely.
know people who just turn up at these events and have a laugh, not being remotely aware
Yeah,
of the little bubble that's been put around them to give them the safe context in which to behave, such that
exactly that.
armed response isn't called. Yeah. Mm.
Absolutely, and even for example, when we did a display on a show on an event I was working on once with the members of the Sealed Knot,
Mm.
um, as the members of the Sealed Knot do, they turn up with the pointed the pointy sharpie stuff and firearms, most of
Hmm.
which are capable of firing a black powder
Hmm. Hmm.
charge, and they're all licensed and kept in gun safes and things like that because that's the law.
Yeah.
And but and again, we had all the certification. We the event was notified, and it was all perfectly legal, so that they could, in American terms, open carry.
Mm.
Whereas if somebody dressed in Civil War gear and with their matchlock musket over their shoulder, even though they weren't carrying any ammunition of any kind, and marched through the local shopping centre, I think people could quite rightly be concerned.
Mm.
It's not the regime in this country is that you are not allowed to openly or in a concealed way carry live weapons, active weapons,
Mm.
weapons that could be and quite right too.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know perhaps some of our viewer in America, some of our viewers in America might disagree with that, or other regimes where firearms are more commonplace. But
Well,
you know,
put it this
that,
way. Put it this way. During this lockdown, my glorious neighbour, and I do adore him. He's a wonderful man. But he has a hobby. His hobby is his car, and in particular, car showing, which involves having custom everything. LEDs
yeah,
under the car, wheels, rims,
yeah,
exhaust pipe, lights, everything, and also a
arena sound
massive
system.
massive
Yeah,
subwoofer, a subwoofer that's bigger than the desk I'm sitting next to. I've actually, I've seen him putting it in. I've talked to him while he's been doing it. It's been very interesting to hear about this interesting subculture that he's part of. But when you can't leave the house, and every now and then he feels the need just to do a subwoofer test for people who are coming round. I'm not going to comment on how many people he's had round to his house, but it's been interesting to observe um,
yeah.
during this lockdown. Uh, I can see why it's a good idea that I don't have access to firearms. Put it that way. Because you get to a point where you could even just fire a warning shot, just like "shut up." So that's I think that for me, in a slightly humorous way, that's the British context. Actually, that's for the benefit of the British context. Is that actually I think that it's a good idea that you can't easily hurt the people around you, and therefore I suppose, as you say. There's a very good argument to be made that actually walking around in a park with what looks like a sword on your hip goes against that principle, I suppose. And yeah, so I can see why.
And absolutely, and it's fair to say, there have been attacks. Unfortunately, in this country, we can still be shocked by shootings and stabbings.
Mm.
Um, and there have been cases, for example, the case of the MP Stephen Timms, for example, who was attacked by somebody, I think, in his doing constituency surgery. This is some time ago now, but by somebody using a samurai sword,
Yeah. Mm.
reproduction of a samurai sword.
Mm.
Another MP, Liberal Democrat MP, was attacked by somebody with a samurai sword. Actually, I think it was his constituency agent or one of his staff was actually killed.
Mm. Mm.
Now, again, and that led to restrictions on the sales of bladed weapons and reproductions of bladed weapons and so
Hmm. Hmm.
on. It's so yeah. I mean, this is it is a sensitive area. People are it is understandable why people would be
Hmm.
nervous
Hmm.
in the presence. Even it's just an in-breath thing. And again, as you like you, I've worked with reenactors all the time, and I've even I actually have a legally deactivated weapon in the house, which I use for uh, demonstrations and so on. But for example, we have the rule that a lot of reenactor groups do, that members of the public aren't allowed to handle weapons because they're not trained to.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So you can show and tell,
Hmm.
but you don't let them handle.
No, no. Well, uh, so what immediately came to my mind then was there are I think that there are various instances of there's a gradation there, isn't there? So
Yeah,
there are, for example, in my particular experience, you can be trained to safely let someone hold a blunt sword, for example. That can happen, but as you say,
yeah,
if you when you're going into that grey area of actively dangerous pointy things or things that could be
yeah,
mistaken for a real active modern weapon, for example,
yeah,
then yes, you
yeah.
have to be very careful with how the public interacts with that. For, as you say, for their
Absolutely,
safety as much as for yours as well, and of course
indeed.
for the grand high insurance companies as well. Um,
Well,
um,
absolutely.
can we just quickly move on to my later addition to the Muppet
Mm,
segment?
yeah,
Last
please,
night
please, please.
I saw a really weird advert asking me. It almost felt like it was sort of going, "Hey you!" Like, hello, yes, what? Um, what's your true ancestry? It seemed to ask. And initially, I looked at some of the graphs and stuff that it was advertising on its advert, and I was a bit. I was like, this looks really weird. I ignored it, but then I'm so glad I clicked. I clicked on the website, which goodness knows what that's done for my Facebook algorithm. I'm probably going to get all sorts of nonsense now set heading my
Oh
way.
God, actually,
Um,
the same thing just happened to me because I've just clicked on the website as well, and I'm looking at the header image, and it's oh
it's
my
so weird. It's so
God.
weird. So it's
Yeah.
mytrueancestry.com, and um, this is actually quite a tragic case of Muppetry, in so much as this is precisely, and the reason why I'm flagging it is because this is precisely the sort of thing that, for example, Brian Sykes flagged when Oxford Ancestors shut down. Um,
Yes.
the increasingly inexpensive and unregulated use of DNA to tell people who they are, where they come from, and essentially assign them an identity. In this instance, is extraordinarily explicit. In cases like no, is it my, no, no, not my ancestry, and findmyancestors.com or what, basically in the more in the places that also do family trees, etc. It's a little less
Yeah.
explicit.
Find my past.
Find my past, things like that. Yeah, exactly. In this
Yeah.
instance, though, my true ancestry, specifically at the beginning, asks, "Are you a ancient Greek? Are you a Roman? Uh, are you a Lombard?" And it goes on from there. And what I find really, what I continue to find amusing, but also I say tragically amusing about these sorts of sites. I mean, in this instance, it's all just very bizarre. Um, there's lots of claims. There's the fact that you can do a basic analysis free of charge. Apparently, you get this weird graph that doesn't really seem to mean a lot that comes back to you. But crucially, it only really tends to, in this instance, reference known ancient civilizations. Apparently, there are 70 civilizations, ancient civilizations represented in these test results. And well, but I'm sure anyone can guess what those ones, or lots of the main ones will be. The ones that are used for advertising purposes tend to be, or even on the best of DNA websites, things like Vikings. I'm a Viking. Who knew? In this instance, we have a picture of a red-headed woman, and guess what she is, Andy? She's a Celt. Of course, she's a Celt.
Um,
She's got red
I was
hair. She
yeah.
must be a Celt. And it's the blurring of lines between genetics, ancient DNA, and essentially a sort of form of I don't know, a form of an expression of eugenics. This idea that national identities and ways of living affect how people look in a very literal way, and have been obviously tied to some of the most hideous things that have happened in recent years. There's a time lapse of a map of Europe going from prehistory into medieval times, which again only samples the headline civilizations, um, and ultimately the reason why wanted to talk about this is the fact that yet again this is feeding into the notion that humanity is not as messy as we think, as it actually is. Rather, sorry, it is feeding into the notion that, for example, at the bottom here, the question is asked: Are you related to a high-ranking Shield maiden? um, it's on the
Yeah.
face of it, you could say it's harmless, but if you know anything about this this particular realm, everything here is screaming, uh, screaming at people who want to have certain answers provided to them about their identity. In that sense,
It also
we've seen stories, for example, in the US where white supremacists have used DNA tests to prove how white they are, and in this
yeah.
instance, the fact that the 70 key civilizations, of course, ancient Egypt, for example, is mentioned. And it's not just Europe. Um,
Mm.
but this is the debasement of ancient DNA research that Brian Sykes was concerned about, and it's the use of cartoon characters of history and attaching people to them in a marketable way that's just ugly. It's not. This isn't, I imagine, where DNA specialists hoped that their research would be taken.
No, but I mean, we exist in a global marketplace and in a
Mm,
global. Some would argue that we're in a global culture war as well,
mm.
and only yesterday, another flurry on Twitter of
Are
people,
you a Celt?
and I know we covered it recently
This one.
on Watch. Well, this was
Mm,
a on an archaeological Facebook group where where there was a considerable upset
mm,
that, and I think the thread was taken down in the end of what appeared to be white supremacists celebrating the use of the term Anglo-Saxon again, which
yeah.
we covered recently on Watching
Yeah.
Brief.
Mm,
So we're dealing with some pretty serious culture war, cultural identity issues here. I mean, this particular website, the thing that struck me most about it is they've got a very interesting collection of images. It looks as though basically they've ransacked Wikipedia and pulled out anything that's vaguely in
mhm,
the public
mhm.
domain to stick on there. It's put it this way, a lot that they haven't spent a lot of time and thought on it, or
No,
certainly not money.
no.
It's a pretty basic website.
Exactly. Yeah. It is.
Um,
It's inelegant in that sense. It's not only ugly in its
yeah,
implication. It's also an inelegant website. Yeah.
I, yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's ugly in its. We can't suggest motivations to people who we've never met. But what I would say on this
No, but when your
is
website's
that
called mytrueancestry.com and your logo is a Spartan warrior's helmet, or sorry, a hoplite warrior's helmet, uh, it's appealing to certain types of people.
except
I'm
if
not.
you dig into it, it talks about cultural groups like Yoruba
No,
and so on.
it
So
does. It does.
and
Yeah.
yeah, so I
I
just
suppose.
think
Well,
what
actually, can I just
go
just for the sake of people who may think I'm going off on a super left wing rant there. What I specifically
on.
mean by that is that this is I mean it by what I said in so much as this is a debasement of a more neutral way of presenting a DNA research. This is not neutral. This is leading you to certain alliances and allegiances. It's leading you to identify in a way in cultures and societies and groups and areas in ways which actually do not relate to our truth as a human species. If you see what I mean, because even if you do have that Viking DNA, well, guess what? Those people came from somewhere else as well. So this is why it annoys me is that this is precisely what Brian Sykes was complaining about, and in his instance he actually even pointed to instances where people were related to particular religious beliefs through their DNA as well. Sorry, I know I've interrupted you there, but I just wanted just to be clear.
No, no, it's okay.
I'm not just going. Oh no, think of the that's not what I'm getting at. It's just
No,
not
I'm
neutral.
no. I think what it does speak to though is on a positive side, it speaks to people wanting to know about history and
Yeah.
their
Hmm.
history
Hmm.
and where they come from, but also perhaps in a wider cultural context at the moment, particularly when there's so much discombobulation, not least from COVID-19 and so on.
Mm.
A sense of, security, a sense of who you are and where you come from is actually perhaps more important in a very stressed world, and
Yeah.
so hence the popularity of something offering a simplistic solution like this.
Uh, yeah, and simple is the word. I think that's yeah. So I don't know. That was a Muppet, but also a Muppet that actually has quite seriously annoyed me. So, um, just briefly, I'm reminded of there's a phrase that a friend of mine has as their profile image on Facebook. I can't remember the specific numbers, but let's say it's 6 million. And the phrase is, "You are the product of 6 million years of evolution. Act like it." and, I- and I like that in so much as it answers that for me answers one of these questions as to who you are and where you come from. Well, the answer is you are the product of very successful things happening through time. If your great 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 grandparents, got squished by a boulder, you wouldn't be here. So luck and success, and for some people that then is related to identity and is related to other expressions of smaller and smaller groups, ever decreasing moments in time that they can relate themselves to. But for me, I can't help but think actually that means that everyone around me is a winner. In some way. We're here. Well done. Well done. We survived. Um, yeah. Moving on. Moving on. It's been an interesting Muppets, I think, to examine.